The days after the confrontation blurred together, a tangled mess of disbelief, anger, and overwhelming sadness. Emily's attempts at reconciliation felt hollow, like she was only sorry she got caught, not for the choices she made. Every time she tried to talk to me, her words felt rehearsed, her tears like they were more for herself than for what she had done to us. I couldn't look at her without seeing the image of her in Mark's arms, laughing like they shared something I could never understand. For a while, I shut down. I couldn't talk to her, and I couldn't tell anyone else. I didn't want to break Lucas's world apart, and I didn't want my friends or family to know how utterly broken I felt. I thought maybe if I stayed silent long enough, if I ignored it, I could find a way back to what we used to be. But that illusion shattered every time I saw her phone light up, every time she walked out the door, and I wondered if she was meeting him again. I became paranoid, questioning everything. Even when she told me she had ended things with Mark, I couldn't believe her. Trust was gone, replaced with suspicion that poisoned every interaction. I found myself checking her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through her messages, hoping, no, expecting, to find evidence that she was still lying. I didn't find anything, but even that didn't feel like reassurance. It just made me wonder if she had gotten better at hiding it. Then came the day that tipped everything over the edge. I was heading out to work, my routine as normal as it could be under the circumstances. Emily had left early for what she said was a meeting at the school. I was grabbing my keys when my phone buzzed, a message from the same anonymous number that had sent me to Mark's apartment. "You really think it's over? Check her phone bill." My heart pounded. I didn't know who this person was, or how they knew so much about what was going on in my marriage, but I couldn't ignore the message. Something told me to follow the advice. I logged into our phone account, something I'd never bothered to do before. As I scrolled through the bill, my stomach churned. There it was. Mark's number. Dozens of calls. Texts. Some from as late as the night after she'd sworn it was over. I felt sick. When Emily got home that evening, I didn't wait for Lucas to go to bed. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I stood in the living room, clutching my phone, the phone bill on display, and when she walked through the door, I could see it in her eyes. She knew. She knew she was caught again. Still talking to him? My voice was cold, dead. She froze, her hands still on the door, looking at me like a deer caught in headlights. "Jason, it's not what you think." "Don't you dare," I snapped, throwing the phone onto the couch. "Don't you dare try to lie to me again." I checked the phone bill. "Emily, I know you've still been talking to him." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might try to lie, to spin another excuse, but then she slumped against the wall, defeated. "I didn't know how to stop," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He kept calling, and I couldn't listen to another word. I trusted you. You told me it was over. You made me feel like I was crazy for even doubting you. And this whole time, you've been lying to my face." "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Jason. I just didn't know how to handle it. I'm lost. I don't want to lose you, but what? You don't want to let him go either?" My voice cracked, the weight of the betrayal crushing me from all sides. "What do you want, Emily? Do you even know anymore?" Her silence was the loudest answer she could have given. She didn't know what she wanted. She was torn between two lives. One with me, built on a foundation of lies, and one with him, full of excitement and whatever fantasy she'd created. I left that night. I didn't tell her where I was going, and I didn't care. I couldn't stay there, couldn't breathe in the same space where every corner reminded me of her betrayal. I drove for hours, aimlessly, the road blurring beneath me as I tried to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go back to her, not after this. But I couldn't just walk away either, not with Lucas to think about. I was trapped, suffocating under the weight of decisions I never thought I'd have to make. Eventually, I ended up at a friend's house. I hadn't told anyone about the affair yet, but as soon as I saw him, it all came pouring out. Every painful detail, every doubt, every moment of anger and heartbreak. He listened without judgment, offering me a place to stay as long as I needed. It was a relief, just to not be alone with my thoughts. Over the next few days, Emily called constantly, leaving messages that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I didn't want to hear her apologies anymore. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I was done. I knew it was over. I just didn't know how to move forward. Eventually, I went back to the apartment. Lucas was there, and I couldn't stay away from him forever. I didn't tell him what was going on, not yet. He was too young to understand, and I wasn't ready to tear his world apart. But he knew something was wrong. He could sense the tension between us, the way I barely spoke to Emily, the way she cried when she thought he wasn't looking. The next few weeks were hell. We went through the motions of daily life, but there was no connection between us anymore. Every conversation was strained, every interaction tinged with the knowledge that this was the end. I started looking for an apartment, knowing that I couldn't stay there much longer. Emily begged me to go to counseling, to try and work through it, but I couldn't. I didn't have anything left to give. One night, as I was packing some of my things, I found something that broke me all over again. It was a letter, hidden in one of Emily's drawers. A love letter from Mark. He talked about their plans, about how he couldn't wait until she left me so they could be together. He talked about a future that didn't include me or Lucas. He talked about how she'd promised him that it would be soon. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking, my mind racing. She'd been planning to leave me. All this time, while she was begging me to stay, she had been making plans with him, telling him what he wanted to hear. It was like a knife to the chest, twisting deeper with every word I read. That was the final straw. I confronted her with the letter, and for the first time, she didn't deny anything. She didn't try to lie her way out of it. She just stood there, silent, defeated, as I packed my bags and walked out the door. I filed for divorce the next day. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Telling Lucas was the worst part. He didn't understand why his mom and dad couldn't make it work, why everything had fallen apart. I tried to shield him from the worst of it, but there was no hiding the pain we were both going through. Emily moved in with Mark not long after I left. I heard through mutual friends that it didn't last long. Their relationship, built on lies and deceit, crumbled under the weight of reality. It didn't matter to me. I was done with both of them. In the end, I realized that the only way to move forward was to focus on myself, to rebuild my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and sadness threatened to consume me, but I kept going. I had Lucas to think about. I had a future to build. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to heal. I went to therapy. I reconnected with friends. I focused on being the best father I could be. The scars of Emily's betrayal would always be there, but they didn't define me anymore. I was more than what she had done to me. I was stronger than the pain she had caused. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. The months after the divorce were a strange combination of freedom and grief. I had cut ties with Emily, except for the necessary arrangements regarding Lucas. Our interactions were cold, professional. The warmth we once had, even the shared history, now felt like a distant memory, and I had to accept that the person I thought I'd grow old with wasn't real. She was someone else, someone who had deceived me so deeply that I wondered if I ever truly knew her at all. But Lucas, my son, kept me grounded. I couldn't afford to wallow in my pain because he needed me. He didn't fully understand why his family had fallen apart, just that his parents were no longer together. I tried to explain things in a way that made sense for a kid, assuring him that both his mom and I still loved him, but the questions came anyway. Why wasn't Mom living with us? Why did I leave? It broke me to see the confusion in his eyes, but I never spoke ill of Emily in front of him. That wasn't who I wanted to be. She had hurt me, but I wouldn't weaponize my child's innocence against her. Slowly, I settled into a new routine. Lucas spent most of the week with me, with weekends alternating between Emily and me. The first few times he went to her new place, it was unbearable. I hated the thought of him being in the same house as Mark. I had to swallow my pride and anger, though, because this was Lucas's life too, and I couldn't let my bitterness seep into his. Eventually, I stopped wondering about what was happening at her place. It wasn't my concern anymore, and the more I let go, the easier it became to focus on myself. Therapy helped. I went regularly, even on days when I didn't want to talk. My therapist, a calm, older man named Dr. Mitchell, was patient. He let me work through the rage, the sadness, and the confusion at my own pace. He encouraged me to stop blaming myself, something I had been doing without realizing it. Deep down, I had begun to think that maybe I hadn't been enough for Emily, that maybe her affair was somehow my fault. But Dr. Mitchell reminded me that cheating was always a choice, and it was a choice Emily had made. I didn't drive her to it. I wasn't responsible for her lies. It took time, but eventually, I began to believe that. I let go of the need to understand her actions, to rationalize why she'd hurt me so deeply. There would never be a satisfying answer to those questions. The reality was simple. She had betrayed me, and now she was out of my life. Work became a welcome distraction. I threw myself into it, taking on more projects, staying late when Lucas was with his mom. The office was a place where I had control, something I desperately craved in the wake of my personal life imploding. The structure, the deadlines, the routine. It was all predictable, unlike the chaos that had consumed my marriage. I found myself slowly climbing up the ladder, gaining recognition for my dedication. My boss noticed, offering me a promotion that came with more responsibilities, but also a substantial pay raise. I took it, feeling like I was finally getting back some of the stability that had been ripped away from me. Lucas was my anchor, though. He was resilient, stronger than I had ever given him credit for. As long as he had both of his parents involved in his life, he seemed to adapt better than I had anticipated. He made friends at school, started playing soccer, and was doing well in his classes. The time we spent together was sacred to me. I made sure to be present for him in ways I hadn't been able to during the turmoil of the last year. We'd play video games, go for hikes, or just sit and talk. He was growing up fast, and I didn't want to miss any of it. As the dust settled, I started thinking about dating again, though the thought terrified me. The idea of opening myself up to someone, of trusting again, felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. I wasn't ready for something serious, not yet, but I knew I couldn't stay closed off forever. Part of me longed for companionship, for someone to share my life with, but the wounds Emily had left were still fresh, and I was wary of repeating the same mistakes. One evening, my friend Greg convinced me to join a dating app. "It's not a big deal," he said. "Just get out there, meet new people, have fun. No pressure." I reluctantly agreed, figuring it couldn't hurt to dip my toes in the water. I created a profile, uploaded a few pictures, and swiped through profiles for the next week or so, not really expecting much. Most of the conversations were brief, awkward, and didn't lead anywhere. I felt like I was playing a game I didn't know the rules to. It had been over a decade since I dated anyone, and the world had changed. People seemed more guarded, more focused on superficial connections, and I didn't know how to navigate it. Then, one day, I matched with a woman named Claire. She was different. Her profile wasn't flashy, and her messages were genuine, thoughtful. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily, without any of the usual awkwardness I'd encountered. She was funny, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Not just my surface-level details, but who I was as a person. After a few weeks of talking, we decided to meet in person. I was nervous, more nervous than I'd been in a long time. Part of me was afraid of being hurt again, of opening up just to have the rug pulled out from under me. But Claire was warm, patient, and easy to talk to. Our first date was simple, coffee and a walk around the city, but by the end of it, I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in months. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Claire wasn't pushy, and she respected the fact that I was still healing from my divorce. She understood that I wasn't looking to rush into anything, and she didn't ask more of me than I was willing to give. She met Lucas after a few months, and they got along well, something that was important to me. Claire was kind and gentle with him, never trying to take over or push boundaries. She respected our family dynamic, which made me feel like I could trust her in ways I hadn't trusted anyone since Emily. Months turned into a year, and before I knew it, Claire had become a regular part of my life. She wasn't trying to replace Emily or fix the wounds left behind by my failed marriage. Instead, she was helping me build something new, something healthier, something stronger. It was slow, but I was learning to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of love without the fear of betrayal hanging over me like a shadow. Emily, meanwhile, had drifted into the background. She and Mark didn't last, and I heard through the grapevine that she had moved away, starting fresh somewhere else. It didn't matter to me anymore. She was a part of my past, but that chapter of my life was closed. I had grieved the loss, faced the pain, and now I was ready to move forward. The scars of Emily's betrayal would never fully fade, but they no longer defined me. They were reminders of where I had been, not where I was headed. With Lucas, with my career, and now with Claire, I had rebuilt my life. It wasn't the life I had envisioned when I first got married, but it was mine, and it was good. Looking back now, I realized that the journey through betrayal and heartbreak taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. It forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, my fears, and my own capacity for forgiveness. Not for Emily, but for myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for her actions, but in the end, I learned that her choices were hers alone. I was worthy of love, worthy of trust, and deserving of happiness. And now, standing on the other side of the storm, I knew that I had found something far more valuable than what I had lost. I had found myself again. As time passed, I began to feel the weight of everything slowly lifting off my shoulders. It was subtle at first, like the air around me was a little lighter, the world a little less overwhelming. I'd wake up in the mornings without the sinking feeling of dread that had once been my constant companion. The memories of Emily, of the betrayal, the lies, the destruction of everything I had thought was solid, still existed, but they had dulled. The edges of those memories had worn smooth, no longer sharp enough to cut me. Lucas and I had settled into a routine, and I had grown more comfortable in my role as a single father. I still saw Emily when we had to coordinate things for Lucas, but those interactions were brief, distant. The tension that had once filled the space between us had dissipated, replaced by an indifferent acceptance. She no longer had the power to hurt me. Her betrayal had defined so much of my life for so long, but I had learned to let go of that bitterness. I had too much to live for, too much to be grateful for, to let her shadow loom over me. Claire was a huge part of that. Our relationship, while still relatively new, had given me a second chance at the kind of connection I had thought was lost forever. She was patient with me, understanding of my hesitancy, and never pressured me to move faster than I was ready. We took things slow, slower than I would have in the past, but it was exactly what I needed. I wasn't looking for something to fill the hole Emily had left. I wanted something that stood on its own, something built on trust, mutual respect, and the lessons I had learned. We spent more time together as the months went on, and eventually, Claire became a regular part of Lucas's life. She wasn't trying to be his mother. She never overstepped that line. But she was a steady presence, someone he could rely on, someone who made our little world feel more complete. I loved watching the two of them together. Lucas had taken to her naturally, and seeing them laugh and joke together made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I didn't realize just how much I had changed until one day. While walking through the park with Claire and Lucas, it hit me. We were laughing about something silly Lucas had said, and the sound of it, the lightness of that moment, made me stop in my tracks. Claire noticed and turned to look at me, concern briefly crossing her face. "You okay?" she asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, smiling at her. "Yeah," I said, my voice soft. "I'm more than okay." Because in that moment, I realized that I had come through the worst of it. The betrayal, the heartache, the anger. It was all behind me now. I wasn't the same person I had been when Emily's lies had shattered my world. I was stronger, wiser, and more grounded. I had survived something that had nearly broken me, and now I was standing on the other side, looking at a future that, for the first time in years, felt bright. I had learned to trust again, to let love back into my life without fear of losing myself in the process. And it wasn't just about Claire. It was about me. I had rebuilt my sense of self, my confidence, and my belief in the possibility of happiness. I had forgiven myself for the mistakes I thought I had made, for the doubts that had plagued me during my marriage to Emily. I had realized that her actions were hers alone, and they didn't define my worth. Months turned into years, and Claire and I continued to grow closer. She moved in with Lucas and me after some time, and our house felt more like a home than it ever had before. We built new traditions together: weekend movie nights, Sunday hikes, spontaneous road trips. Our little family unit was unconventional, but it was perfect for us. There was a moment, about 2 years after the divorce, when I realized just how far I had come. It was Lucas's 10th birthday, and we had thrown him a small party at the house. Emily had come by to drop off a gift, and though our interaction was cordial, it was distant. She seemed different, too, quieter, more reserved, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. I didn't feel anger when I saw her, though. I didn't feel much of anything, really. She was a part of my past, and that's where she would stay. As she left, I looked around the yard at the life I had built, at Claire, laughing with Lucas as they chased each other around, at the friends who had supported me through everything, at the sense of peace that had settled over me, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and with a clearer sense of who I was. I had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about acknowledging it, accepting it, and moving forward anyway. I had learned that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, not just in others, but in myself. As I stood there, watching my son laugh with the woman who had helped me heal, I realized that I had found something far better than the life I had once thought was perfect. I had found something real, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Life after Emily had become everything I hadn't imagined, but somehow exactly what I needed. Claire, Lucas, and I had found a rhythm together that made our house feel full of laughter, full of love, and full of new memories. The scars of my past, while still present, had become faint reminders of how far I'd come, not chains that kept me tied to old wounds. It was strange sometimes how the simplest moments could stop me in my tracks, reminding me of how much had changed in just a few short years. One Saturday morning, I woke up early to the smell of pancakes coming from the kitchen. I smiled as I walked downstairs, finding Claire and Lucas flipping pancakes, their laughter filling the room. Claire caught my eye and smiled, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. This was my life now, simple, real, and grounded in trust. Emily had faded into the background, our only interactions revolving around Lucas's schedule or school events. She had moved on, though not in the way I'd expected. The last I heard, she was living alone in a different town, working a new job, and trying to rebuild her life. Mark, the man who had been at the center of the betrayal, was long out of the picture. It wasn't my place to feel pity or satisfaction over what happened to her, but I couldn't deny the relief that came with knowing her choices no longer had any control over me. Claire had become my rock in ways I never thought I'd need again. She wasn't perfect, but she was honest, something I had come to value more than anything else. I trusted her, not just because of who she was, but because I had learned to trust myself again. I knew the signs now. I knew how to communicate my fears, my doubts, and Claire never dismissed them. She never tried to make me feel crazy for wanting reassurance, and that was a big part of why our relationship worked. We had built something solid, something that couldn't be easily shaken. It wasn't just about Claire, though. It was about me too. The process of healing had taught me that my happiness, my sense of peace, wasn't tied to another person. It was something I had to cultivate within myself, something I had to guard and nurture. Claire added to that happiness, enriched my life, but she wasn't the source of it. I had learned, the hard way, that putting your sense of worth in someone else's hands was a dangerous thing. Now, I knew better. There was a moment, about 3 years after I had left Emily, when Claire and I were sitting on the porch after a long day. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the yard, and Lucas was inside, playing video games with his friends. It was one of those quiet, unremarkable moments that felt more profound than any grand gesture or dramatic event. Claire was leaning her head on my shoulder, and we were just sitting there, in silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, her voice cutting through the stillness. I thought for a moment, trying to put into words the mix of emotions swirling inside me. "I'm just grateful," I said finally, "for everything. For you. For Lucas. For this life we've built." Claire smiled and squeezed my hand. I am too. It was in moments like that, the quiet, ordinary moments, that I realized just how far I had come. I had once been so consumed by the pain of Emily's betrayal that I thought I'd never find my way out. But now, sitting here with Claire, feeling the weight of her head on my shoulder, I knew that I had found something better than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, really living. A few weeks later, I did something I had been thinking about for a while. It wasn't planned, not really. It wasn't some elaborate event or grand proposal. It was just a moment that felt right. We were on a weekend trip, just Claire and me, up in the mountains. We'd rented a small cabin, away from everything, just to get some time alone together. The air was crisp, and the leaves had started to turn, painting the landscape in shades of red, orange, and gold. We'd spent the day hiking, exploring, and now we were sitting by the fire, sipping wine, wrapped up in blankets. I looked over at her, watching the way the firelight danced across her face, and I knew this was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I had known it for a while, really, but in that moment, it felt undeniable. I reached into my bag, pulling out a small box I'd been carrying with me for weeks, waiting for the right time. "Claire," I said softly, my heart racing. She looked at me, her eyes full of love and warmth, and I knew I didn't need to make a big speech. She already knew how much she meant to me. "I love you, more than I ever thought I could love anyone again, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I opened the box, revealing the ring inside. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the shock and happiness spread across her face. She put her hand to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, of course, yes." I slipped the ring onto her finger, and we kissed, the fire crackling softly beside us. It wasn't just a proposal, it was a promise. A promise that I had learned from my past, that I was ready to build a future with her. A future built on trust, love, and all the lessons I had fought so hard to learn. Our wedding was small, intimate. Just a handful of close friends and family, with Lucas standing beside me as my best man. There were no elaborate decorations, no grand venue. Just us, the people we loved, and a promise to move forward together, as partners, as equals. Standing there, looking into Claire's eyes as we exchanged vows, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not just the absence of pain, but true peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be, with the person you're meant to be with. Lucas, now a teenager, was thriving. He was happy, doing well in school, making friends, and excelling in soccer. Watching him grow into the young man he was becoming made me feel proud beyond words. He had weathered the storm of our family's breakup with grace and resilience, and I knew that, in part, it was because I had been there for him. I had been steady, present, and loving, even when my own world was falling apart. I had been the father he needed, and now I was watching him flourish. Life wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but it was good. Really, truly good. I had learned so much from the pain Emily had caused, but I had also learned that pain doesn't have to define you. You can move on, rebuild, and find love again. You can choose to trust, even when it feels impossible. You can find happiness in the smallest moments, and you can build a life that is full, rich, and beautiful, even after the worst kind of betrayal. As Claire and I sat on the porch of our new home, the one we had bought together after the wedding, I looked at the sunset, the sky turning shades of orange and pink, and I knew this was where I was meant to be. With her, with Lucas, with the life we had built. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Just when I thought life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, an unexpected call disrupted the tranquility we had built. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was wrapping up work when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I packed up my laptop. There was a brief pause on the other end before a familiar voice spoke. "Jason, it's Emily." I froze, the sound of her voice pulling me back into a past I thought I'd left behind. It had been years since we'd spoken beyond the necessary logistics for Lucas. "Emily," I replied cautiously, Is everything okay? She sighed, a weary sound that hinted at underlying distress. I need to talk to you. It's important. My first thought was that something had happened to Lucas, but I quickly dismissed it. He was at school, and I would have been contacted if there was an emergency. Is this about Lucas? No, he's fine, she assured me quickly. It's about me. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I hesitated, conflicted about reopening lines of communication that had been closed for so long. But despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't ignore the urgency in her voice. All right, I said finally. When and where? We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. I informed Claire about the call, not wanting to keep secrets. She was supportive as always, though I could tell she was curious and perhaps a bit apprehensive. Do you want me to come with you? She offered. I shook my head. I think it's something I need to handle on my own. But thank you. As I drove to the cafe, a mix of emotions churned inside me. Curiosity, concern, a hint of dread. I had no idea what to expect. When I arrived, I spotted Emily sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked different, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Jason, she greeted softly as I approached. Emily, I nodded, taking a seat across from her. You said it was important. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, and I don't blame you. But I didn't know who else to turn to. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I've been diagnosed with a medical condition, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. It's serious. A knot formed in my stomach. Despite everything, I wouldn't wish ill health on her. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. What is it? She hesitated before answering. It's kidney failure. I've been on dialysis, but the doctors say I need a transplant. I blinked, the weight of her words sinking in. I'm sorry, Emily. Is there anything I can do? She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. I was tested, and unfortunately, none of my immediate family are a match. I was hoping, maybe you could get tested. I was taken aback. You want me to see if I'm a donor match? She nodded, her eyes pleading. I know it's a lot to ask, especially after everything I did. But I'm desperate, Jason. I don't expect forgiveness, and I understand if you say no. I had to ask. A storm of emotions swirled within me. Shock, confusion, a flicker of anger, but also compassion. I took a moment to process her request. Donating a kidney was a significant decision, one that could have serious implications for my own health. I need to think about this, I said carefully. It's not a decision I can make lightly. Of course, she agreed quickly. Take all the time you need. And if you decide not to, I understand. Truly. We sat in silence for a moment before I stood up. I have to go, I told her. I'll be in touch. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind. Part of me felt it was unfair of her to ask such a thing after the pain she had caused. Another part of me recognized the gravity of her situation. She was the mother of my son, and despite our fractured past, her well-being did affect Lucas. When I told Claire about the conversation, she listened attentively, her expression thoughtful. That's a heavy request, she said gently. I know, I sighed, rubbing my temples. I don't know what to do. On one hand, I feel like I owe her nothing. On the other, I can't ignore that this could impact Lucas. If something happened to her, Claire placed her hand over mine. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But make sure it's a choice you can live with either way. Over the next few days, I wrestled with the decision. I spoke with my doctor to understand the risks involved. I thought about Lucas and how losing his mother could affect him. In the end, I decided to get tested. A week later, the results came in. I was a compatible match. I arranged to meet Emily again to give her the news. She was visibly anxious when I arrived. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I got tested, I informed her. I'm a match. Her eyes filled with tears. You are? I nodded. Yes. She covered her mouth with her hand, her emotions spilling over. I don't know how to thank you. I'm willing to proceed with the donation, I continued. But we need to establish some boundaries. Of course, she agreed hastily. Anything. I want Lucas to know what's happening in an age-appropriate way, I explained. He deserves to be prepared in case anything goes wrong. She swallowed hard. Agreed. And after this, we keep our interactions focused on Lucas's needs. I don't want any confusion or misunderstandings. She nodded, her gaze steady. I understand. And I appreciate this more than you know. The preparation for the surgery was intense. There were numerous tests, consultations, and a psychological evaluation to ensure I was making the decision freely and without coercion. I informed my employer and arranged for time off. Claire was a constant support, attending appointments with me and providing reassurance. When we told Lucas, he was understandably worried. Is Mom going to be okay? He asked, his eyes wide with concern. That's what we're hoping for, I told him gently. The doctors are going to help her, and I'm going to do my part. Will you be okay? He pressed. I smiled reassuringly. I'll be fine. I'll need to rest for a while afterward, but I'll be back to normal before you know it. The day of the surgery arrived, and as I was prepped for the operation, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was doing this for Lucas as much as for Emily. It felt like the right thing to do. The surgery went smoothly for both of us. The doctors were optimistic about Emily's prognosis, and I was told to expect a full recovery. As I recuperated in the hospital, Claire stayed by my side, her presence a soothing balm. I'm proud of you, she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. I reached for her hand. I couldn't have done it without you. A few days later, as I was preparing to be discharged, Emily requested to see me. I agreed, and she was wheeled into my room, looking pale but grateful. Thank you, Jason, she said earnestly. You've given me a second chance at life. I met her gaze. I did it for Lucas, I admitted. He needs his mother. She nodded, tears welling up. I know, and I want to make the most of this chance, to be a better mother, a better person. I hoped she meant it. Take care of yourself, Emily. I will, she promised. Recovery was slower than I anticipated, but Claire and Lucas were incredible caretakers. They handled everything, from meals to managing household tasks, allowing me to focus on healing. The experience, while challenging, brought us even closer together. Months passed, and life gradually returned to normal. Emily moved back to our town to be closer to Lucas, though we maintained our boundaries. She seemed to be making genuine efforts to rebuild her relationship with him, attending his soccer games and school events more regularly. One afternoon, Lucas approached me with a thoughtful expression. Dad, can we talk? Sure, buddy, I replied, setting aside my book. What's on your mind? He shuffled his feet slightly. I know you helped Mom when she was sick. She told me. I nodded slowly. Yes, I did. Why did you do it? After everything? I took a deep breath, considering my words. Because sometimes, doing the right thing is more important than holding on to hurt or anger. Your mom made mistakes, but she's still your mother, and I wanted to make sure you'd have her in your life. He absorbed this quietly before looking up at me. That was really brave. I smiled softly. Thanks, Lucas. I just want you to be happy. He hugged me then, tightly, and I felt a surge of emotion. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. Life has a way of bringing unexpected challenges, but also unexpected healing. Through this experience, I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing someone's actions. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of bitterness. Donating my kidney to Emily wasn't an act of reconciliation, but a step toward closure. Claire and I continued to build our life together, stronger than ever. We faced each hurdle side by side, knowing that our love was resilient. Lucas thrived, benefiting from the renewed presence of both his parents in his life, albeit in different capacities. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, laughter filling the room, I looked at my family, Claire's eyes sparkling as she told a funny story, Lucas grinning widely, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but it had led me here, to this moment. I had learned that while we can't control the actions of others, we can choose how we respond. We can choose compassion over anger, love over resentment, and in doing so, find peace. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. They were simply part of my story. A story of betrayal, yes, but also of healing, growth, and ultimately, of love. As Claire reached over to squeeze my hand, her eyes meeting mine with unwavering support, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. And for that, I was profoundly grateful. As life settled back into its steady rhythm after the surgery, a newfound sense of peace washed over me. There had been so many unexpected turns, things I couldn't have imagined enduring, let alone emerging from. But now, I felt lighter. The weight of bitterness, anger, and betrayal had slowly dissolved, replaced by clarity and acceptance. Emily's presence in Lucas's life grew more consistent. It was as if the surgery had granted her a new perspective, not just physically but emotionally. She didn't become the perfect mother overnight. No one does, but I could see her trying. She attended more of Lucas's games, started showing up to parent-teacher conferences, and took more initiative in spending quality time with him. It was the most I could have hoped for, not just for her, but for Lucas. He needed her in his life, and despite everything, I wanted him to have that relationship. Claire, Lucas, and I became a tighter unit, even as we navigated our blended family dynamics. Claire's understanding and patience throughout the whole ordeal solidified the bond we shared. She never wavered, even when I had to make the tough call to help Emily. In every difficult moment, she stood by me, not out of obligation, but out of love. I knew more than ever that she was the partner I had always hoped for, but had never truly believed I could find after everything fell apart. We married the following summer in a simple, intimate ceremony, with only our closest friends and family. Lucas was our ring bearer, beaming with pride as he walked down the aisle. The ceremony wasn't just about Claire and me. It was about the life we were building together, about the healing we had all gone through to get to this moment. Standing there, holding Claire's hands as we exchanged vows, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't just the joy of marrying the woman I loved. It was the knowledge that I had come full circle. I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and the darkness of doubt, and now, I was standing on the other side, stronger for it. Claire and I honeymooned on a quiet island, far away from the noise of the world. We spent our days walking along the beach, talking about the future, about our hopes, dreams, and everything we wanted to build together. The peace we found there felt like the culmination of years of struggle and healing. It was a reward for the resilience we'd both shown, and it marked the beginning of something truly beautiful. When we returned home, life resumed, but it was better, more grounded. Claire had fully settled into her role in our family, and Lucas adored her. We had developed a mutual respect for each other's relationships, mine with Lucas and hers, which had flourished into something uniquely special. She was never trying to replace Emily, but rather, she had carved out her own space in Lucas's life, offering him the kind of support and stability that had sometimes been lacking. As for Emily, she seemed to keep her word. She had distanced herself from any romantic entanglements for a while and focused on her health and her relationship with Lucas. The surgery had taken a toll on her emotionally, and perhaps for the first time in years, she was finally reflecting on her life and the choices that had led her to where she was. We still had our boundaries, but the interactions were no longer filled with tension. We had both moved on, in different ways. One day, Lucas came home from school, excited about an upcoming science project. He was now 11, and his curiosity about the world was boundless. He wanted to build a model of the solar system, and of course, I was more than happy to help. As we worked together in the garage, crafting planets out of styrofoam balls and wire, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Watching him grow, seeing the kind of thoughtful and kind person he was becoming, filled me with gratitude. He had been through a lot, witnessed the collapse of his parents' marriage and the rebuilding of a new family, but he had emerged stronger, just like me. That evening, as Claire and I sat on the porch, enjoying the quiet after a long day, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few years. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd expected. It had been messy, painful, and full of unexpected detours. But those detours had led me here, to a life that was richer, more meaningful, and more beautiful than I could have imagined. Do you ever think about how far we've come? I asked Claire, my voice soft as I watched the sun dip below the horizon. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. All the time. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I don't know if I ever told you this, but there were times when I wasn't sure I'd ever be happy again. After everything with Emily, I didn't think it was possible. But you changed that. You showed me that love doesn't have to be painful, that trust can be rebuilt. She squeezed my hand. You're the one who chose to open up again, Jason. You're the one who healed. I thought about that for a moment, letting her words sink in. She was right. I had made the choice to heal, to move forward, to not let the betrayal of the past define my future. And that, more than anything, was what had led me to this moment. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. It was a quiet, unremarkable moment, but it was also everything. It was a moment that symbolized peace, love, and the knowledge that no matter what life threw at us, we could handle it together. The years went on, and life continued to surprise me in the best ways. Claire and I welcomed a daughter into the world 2 years later, a little girl we named Emma. Lucas was ecstatic to be a big brother, and watching him dote on her reminded me of how far our family had come. Our home was filled with laughter, with love, and with the kind of happiness that only comes from knowing you've earned it. Through it all, I never forgot the lessons I had learned. I never forgot that trust was something to be nurtured, not taken for granted. I never forgot that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, day after day, even when things got hard. And I never forgot that healing is a journey, one that doesn't have a clear endpoint, but is instead a continuous process of growth and understanding. And as I watched Emma take her first steps, with Lucas cheering her on and Claire beaming with pride, I realized something. This was the life I had been waiting for. Not the life I had lost, but the one I had fought for, the one I had built with the people I loved. Looking back now, I don't see the pain anymore. I see the journey. I see the resilience. I see the love that carried me through it all. And for that, I am endlessly grateful. As the years passed, the life Claire, Lucas, Emma, and I built together continued to grow in ways that made me grateful every day. Our little family, stitched together through love, patience, and time, was more than I could have ever hoped for. The pain of the past was now a distant echo, and the love that filled our home was constant. Watching Lucas grow into a young man was one of the greatest joys of my life. He was thoughtful, kind, and curious about the world in a way that constantly amazed me. He and Emma shared a bond that was pure and protective, and I often caught Lucas teaching her little things, whether it was helping her ride a bike or explaining some science fact he'd picked up. Their relationship was the heart of our family, and I saw how much strength they drew from each other, just as I had from Claire. The milestones came and went, each one a reminder of how far we'd come. Lucas's high school graduation was an especially emotional day. I watched him stand on the stage, his tall frame hunched over as he shook hands with his teachers, his face beaming with pride. It felt like just yesterday I was teaching him how to tie his shoes or coaching his little league soccer team. But now, here he was, standing on the precipice of adulthood, ready to take on the world. Emily attended the ceremony, sitting a few rows behind us. Our relationship had long since stabilized into a mutual respect, built around co-parenting and understanding the importance of Lucas's well-being. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. She had found a new path, and so had I. In many ways, the space between us had given us both the freedom to heal and grow. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Emily approached me while Claire was taking pictures with Lucas and Emma. She smiled, though it was a quiet, reserved smile, the kind that spoke of understanding the unspoken. "Hard to believe he's graduating, huh?" she said, her voice soft. I nodded. "Yeah, it's hard to wrap my head around. He's ready, though?" She paused, glancing over at Lucas, who was laughing with his friends and Claire. "He's a good kid. We did something right." I didn't respond right away, letting her words hang in the air. The truth was, yes, we had both done our best for Lucas, but I knew that the stability he had found came from the family Claire and I had built for him, not just from us as his biological parents. Still, there was no need to reopen old wounds. The past was the past, and I had long since let it go. Yeah, he's turned out pretty great, I said simply. Emily nodded, offering me a final, quiet smile before walking away to catch up with Lucas. I watched her go, feeling nothing more than a sense of closure. There was no bitterness, no regret, just a quiet acknowledgement of a chapter that had long since ended. As the years continued to move forward, our family flourished. Lucas went off to college, pursuing his passion for engineering, and Emma continued to grow, her bubbly personality filling our home with light and joy. Claire and I settled into a new phase of life, one where we found more time for ourselves, for each other. The demands of young children had lessened, and we enjoyed the freedom to explore new hobbies, travel, and simply enjoy each other's company. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the back porch of our home, watching the sunset as we had done so many times before, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The orange and pink hues of the sky bathed everything in a soft glow, and the quiet between us was filled with the kind of comfort that only comes from years of shared love and experience. Remember when we sat on this porch years ago, talking about how far we'd come? I asked, glancing over at her. She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. Of course. It feels like a lifetime ago. It does, I agreed. But I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we built this. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand slipping into mine. Me too. We've come a long way. We sat there in silence for a while, content in the moment, our hearts full. The challenges we had faced together, both the ones from the past and the ones that would inevitably come in the future, had only strengthened our bond. We were a team, partners in every sense of the word, and I knew that no matter what life threw at us, we would face it together. As the years continued, our family continued to grow, not just in love but in memories and experiences. We celebrated Emma's milestones, from her first day of high school to her college acceptance letter. We watched Lucas graduate from college and land his first job, beaming with pride as he moved into his own apartment. The moments were big, but it was the smaller, quieter moments that I cherished the most. The Sunday dinners where we all gathered around the table, laughing and talking about our weeks. The lazy afternoons spent watching old movies with Emma or walking in the park with Claire. It was those moments that reminded me of what truly mattered. In time, the children had their own lives, but the bond we shared as a family remained strong. Claire and I watched as Lucas began to find his own place in the world, just as Emma did. Our house was often filled with the sounds of their visits, laughter, the clinking of dishes, and the warm, familiar chaos that only family can bring. One evening, after everyone had gone, Claire and I sat together on the porch, the same place where so many conversations had taken place over the years. We didn't need to say much. We both knew what this moment meant. It was a reflection of everything we had gone through, of all the love, the struggles, and the triumphs that had brought us here. I turned to Claire, her face still illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. "We did it," I said quietly. She smiled, squeezing my hand. Yes, we did. The journey had been long. There had been pain, heartbreak, and moments when I wasn't sure if I'd ever find happiness again. But sitting there, in the stillness of the evening, with Claire by my side, I realized something important. It wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the journey. It was the lessons learned, the resilience found in the darkest of times, and the love that had carried me through. Looking back, I saw how each step, every moment of despair, every hard decision, every act of forgiveness, had led me to this life. A life that was full, imperfect, and beautiful. As the night settled in around us, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was grateful for the second chances, for the love that had found me when I least expected it, and for the family we had built together. The scars of the past were still there, but they were no longer painful. They were a part of me, of my story, but they didn't define me. What defined me was the love that filled my life, the love that had transformed everything. And as I sat there, hand in hand with Claire, I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it together. And for the rest of my life, that would be enough. As the seasons of life turned, I came to appreciate more and more how time heals, reshapes, and teaches. Claire and I continued to build our lives together, not just through the big moments but through the quiet, simple ones that often held the most meaning. The children grew up and, as is the way of things, slowly began carving their own paths. Lucas found a partner he adored, and Emma blossomed into an intelligent, driven young woman with a sense of wonder that reminded me of my younger self. When Lucas announced his engagement, it was a bittersweet moment. He had grown into a man I was endlessly proud of, kind, thoughtful, and strong in ways that I had always hoped he'd be. Claire and I threw ourselves into helping with the wedding plans, and it felt like a culmination of everything I had worked for as a father. Lucas was happy. He was loved. And that was all I had ever wanted for him. At the wedding, I found myself standing off to the side for a moment, watching Lucas laugh with his new wife, surrounded by friends and family. Claire joined me, slipping her arm through mine, and we stood there together, watching our son start his own chapter. "You've done good, Jason," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "We've done good," I corrected, looking down at her. "It's not just me. It never has been." She smiled and leaned into me, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the years lift. There was no lingering bitterness from the past, no unresolved hurt. It was just us, standing together, watching the next generation move forward. When Emma graduated college a couple of years later, she announced plans to travel abroad for a year before settling into a career. Claire and I were excited for her. Emma had always had a spark of curiosity that pushed her to explore the world in ways that I hadn't. Her wanderlust was infectious, and I found myself imagining what adventures lay ahead for her. But with each milestone, I couldn't help but feel the quiet shifts of time. The house, once so full of life and noise, grew quieter as Lucas and Emma moved further into their own lives. There were no more late-night study sessions or weekends filled with soccer games. The silence wasn't unwelcome, but it was different. Claire and I had prepared for this. It was the natural order of things. Yet, in the quiet moments, I realized how deeply I had come to cherish the simple act of sitting with Claire. We had gone through so much together, and now, in this new phase of our lives, there was a deep contentment in just being. We didn't need to talk much. We just enjoyed each other's presence. As Emma prepared for her trip abroad, she spent a lot of time with Claire and me, and I could see her soaking in the last bits of home before venturing out. She had the same adventurous spirit as Lucas, though it manifested in different ways. Watching her pack, I was filled with the same pride I had felt for Lucas when he set out on his own. It was the pride of seeing your children grow into who they're meant to be, strong, independent, full of life. The evening before she left for her travels, we had a family dinner, just the four of us. Lucas and his wife had come by, and we shared stories, laughed over old memories, and talked about Emma's plans. As the night drew to a close, Emma hugged Claire tightly, then turned to me with a smile. "Don't get too bored without me," she teased, her eyes sparkling. I hugged her back, the warmth of her embrace filling me with that familiar bittersweet feeling. "We'll manage," I replied, my voice soft. "But we'll miss you." As the years moved on, and as Lucas and Emma fully stepped into their own lives, I realized that the quiet wasn't something to fear. Claire and I had built a life together that could weather the transitions, that could evolve with each new chapter. The love we had cultivated, rooted in trust, patience, and understanding, wasn't dependent on the busyness of raising children. It was something deeper, something that had grown and flourished over time, through every hardship, every triumph. It wasn't long after Emma left that Claire, and I began to talk more seriously about retirement. We had often fantasized about what our later years would look like, especially during those hectic days of raising kids and managing careers. But now, with the reality of it on the horizon, we began to plan in earnest. We weren't the type to sit still for long, and we knew we wanted to spend those years traveling, exploring all the places we hadn't had time for when life was busy with work and children. We decided to take an extended trip through Europe, something we had always dreamed about. It was a few months of planning, figuring out where to go, what to see, and the anticipation of it all brought a new kind of excitement into our lives. It felt like the beginning of another chapter, one where we could just be us again, without the responsibilities that had once consumed us. Our trip was everything we had hoped it would be. We wandered through the streets of Paris, hiked the rolling hills of Tuscany, and stood in awe of ancient ruins in Greece. But more than the sights, it was the time together, the uninterrupted connection, that made the experience unforgettable. There were moments, sitting in a small cafe in Italy or walking hand in hand along the cobbled streets of Spain, when I'd look at Claire and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. We had been through so much, but here we were, still standing, still together. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our rental in Santorini, watching the sun sink below the horizon, Claire looked over at me with a soft smile. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew what she meant. We both carried the memories of where we had come from, me, from the wreckage of my first marriage, and her, from her own path before we met. But the truth was, I didn't dwell on it anymore. Sometimes, I admitted, but I wouldn't change any of it. She raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts, I said, turning to face her fully. They brought me here. They made me who I am. They gave me this life with you. She smiled at that, leaning into me as the warm breeze swept across the balcony. We sat there for a long time, the silence between us comfortable and full of meaning. We didn't need to say much because we both understood what the other was thinking. Life had taken us on a journey we hadn't planned, but it had led us to this moment, and for that, I was grateful beyond words. The years continued to roll on, and as we aged, Claire and I embraced the slower pace of life. We became grandparents when Lucas and his wife had their first child, a little girl named Sophie. Holding my granddaughter in my arms for the first time was a moment that brought everything full circle. There was something incredible about watching the next generation grow, knowing that the love and lessons we had passed on would continue through them. Our home became a gathering place for family, holiday dinners, birthdays, and those casual weekends where everyone just came by to be together. It wasn't the chaos of raising young children anymore, but it was something just as fulfilling. It was the joy of seeing the family you've built continue to thrive, of watching new memories being made in the same house that had once been filled with soccer balls, school projects, and late-night talks. One afternoon, as Claire and I sat on the porch with Sophie playing at our feet, I looked out at the yard where Lucas and Emma had once played. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It was the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you've lived a life full of love, of meaning, of lessons learned and passed down. I squeezed Claire's hand, and she looked over at me with a knowing smile. No words were needed. We both understood the depth of what we had built together. In the end, life had taken me through unexpected twists and turns, from the pain of betrayal to the joy of rebuilding something beautiful. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. I had learned to love again, to trust again, and to build a life that was full of more happiness than I could have ever imagined. As I sat there, surrounded by my family, I realized that the story wasn't just mine. It was ours. It was a story of resilience, of love, of second chances. And in the end, that's what mattered most. I was home, I was whole, and I was grateful. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.